Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Elder. I'm a senior product designer on the foundations team at GitLab. And this is Will It Pass? This is a live accessibility audit going through one of our components in Pajamas and GitLab UI. And so we'll walk through that. You can find me on GitLab at jeldergl and on Twitter at Jeremy Elder. So today, looking at badges. Badges have multiple variants, you can see here. They have states, they can be actionable, they can be text or icon, and size difference. So we'll work through all of those examples and take a look at them. The tools I'm using, MacBook Pro, I'm going to use the built-in VoiceOver for that. Side note, it is different than VoiceOver for iOS. I won't be working through this with iOS right now. Browsers, Chrome, Safari, Firefox. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to test just in Chrome. And typically I'll use VirtualBox with an instance of Windows 10. And on that, I'll use NVDA, the screen reader there, and typically Firefox and Chrome, which are recommended to use with NVDA. And I also like to use a Windows keyboard, and the reason for that is because it has certain key mappings that help with NVDA. I've tried using some software to remap keyboards like the Mac specific keyboard, and it just hasn't been as efficient as using a Windows keyboard. Those are pretty common to find, pretty inexpensive. So, and then the two last things I use are tools. There's a handy notebook, jot down notes along the way that I can reference later. And then finally, reference materials. So just pull up WCAG or maybe it's ARIA, recommended behavior, or ARIA roles, etc. Whatever documentation I need to sufficiently look through a component. With badges, looking at them, they're fairly simple, so it won't take a lot of overhead here today. What I always like to do at first is outline what to expect. So if I'm looking at a badge, what should I expect from this component? What should be the behavior, the attributes of it? So I'm going to look at sufficient color contrast. I'm going to look at not relying on color alone for meaning, for correct semantics in the markup. To make sure that when icons are used, they aren't announced by a screen reader. And there's a caveat to that. If there are instances where a badge could have just an icon, and in that case, we need to make sure it's announced, but we'll get to that. And then for linked badges, we want to make sure that a focus state is visible. So in GitLab, badges are used for meta information. So systems are, for status of things like, okay, the issue is open and it's closed. And so for that reason, they are considered meta information, and typically they're in line with other content that helps provide context to the meaning of the badge. So we won't be looking too much at how a badge provides meaning alone. If I go over here, you can see we have badges in pajamas. If I go to the component status, you can see badges accessibility audit is upcoming. And I'll go over to GitLab UI where we can see all of our examples and variants. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm just going to refresh this page here so that we're looking at the default right away. All right, so we can see straight up we have test badge. This is what we're looking at. We have examples to go through. We have different variants, sizes. It's actionable. It's within a button, and if it has an icon. We'll just start with the basic. So what I like to do, back to the outline, is really just start with color and color contrast. There's a couple of ways to do that. I know that in Figma, our design system, we should be using prescriptive color variables so that any combination we use should automatically pass based on the numbers. So if this is gray 500 against, gray 50 or gray 10, we know that those combinations pass, but I like to just give it a quick test anyway. So for that, I'll pull up the variants. You can see there are six. And what I have here is just a little tool called Contrast for the Mac. It's basically allows you to choose two colors with a picker, and then it'll give you the contrast ratio as an outcome. So if I look at the text, look at the background, you can see we have a 6.52. Our target for these elements would be a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. So this clearly passes the AA score that we're looking for. And I'll just repeat this for each of these, 6.83. And 5. I think that even the text, I might have grabbed a pixel off here. Yes, it's a little darker. Right. Passes. Passes. And you can see these are all pretty consistent with the contrast ratio. And that's just a result of using a normalized color palette with variables that have been kind of standardized and normalized so that a contrast ratio of an orange 100 to an orange 500 is the same as a green 100 to a green 500. It really helps when just changing variants to have a system like that in place. So we can see all of these pass. So they satisfy color contrast. Now, as far as using color alone to infer meaning, that's going to be a little more difficult outside of context, right? So we know here muted, neutral, info, success, danger, warning. Those are terms that would help you understand, like, okay, this is a danger. And so what I mean by not using color alone is if you just had, for example, let's just say you had the word string in this danger badge. Well, the word string or the combination of the color and that term aren't going to help infer that there is like a danger error. So you want that text to also communicate that there's a problem there, like something has failed, something has not happened correctly, there's an error. So you want that text to do that so that the color alone isn't what's inferring the meaning of that badge and that variant. So like I said, it's hard to do in context here. That's more of a test, a litmus test once it gets into the product. So the next thing we want to look at is semantics. So I'm just going to look at the source. You can see here that it's pulling in our view code for the badge. Let's switch over to HTML, and you can see that there's a span with the styles and the text. I'll go ahead and just inspect that with the built-in tools in Chrome. And indeed, that's what we have. So nothing incorrect with the semantics here. I think that is accurate and that works for our badge. Using a span as kind of a nondescript tag, I think is helpful for something like this. All right. So let's get to some of the more nitty gritty here. Sizes, we're not worried about that. We've kind of, that's more of a visual piece of it. Let's talk about actionable. So as you can see with these actionable badges, if I hover these, you can see now that I've, the cursor changes and there's actually an indicator that these are clickable. There's a different state with the border. And so far so good. If we, once again, we'll inspect those. And you can see that it's within an anchor. So that's appropriate. Badges typically link to more information about that status that they're providing rather than performing actions. So I think that is correct to use an anchor rather than a button. Something that we talked about was focus states. So I'm just going to focus through here. And you can see as I tab, you can see down here, there's a little, my keyboard controls show up. You can see I can tab through these. And as I do that, they do receive a visible focus state. So that passes. Inside button is one that I don't believe we have documentation for in Pajamas quite yet, but I'm just going to take a look at it just to see what we've got here. All right, so we've got the span within the button with the number. So I think that this is appropriate. This should be read correctly. We'll do a test in a minute. And then badge, excuse me, badge icon finally. The one thing about this is, you notice there's two options here. One is icon only, one is with text. In the instance where there's text, we want that icon to be skipped by a screen reader. In the instance that it was icon only, we would want to use an ARIA label to have that badge read by a screen reader so that the meaning is not lost and it doesn't get skipped over. So we'll test those in a minute as well. Excuse me. All right, so what I like to do is just fire up VoiceOver. So on my keyboard, that is Command F5. All right. Let's just refresh here. All right. It's all right. We'll get that to stop. All right. Sometimes firing that up, it can go absolutely crazy. So now you're not able to hear this at the moment. There's just an issue with recording system audio. But what you can see on this little window here is that it's reading out everything that the screen reader is saying. And so uh, what I'm going to do is just navigate via keyboard to these items and see what gets announced. All right, so test badge. It's a text element inside of a frame, so that's correct. If I were to come down here to, let's say, variants, you can see the result is correct. It's text elements. Let's go to actionable and see what happens. The reason I select some of that text is simply to just move my focus closer to that area so it's a little quicker to navigate to. So link muted inside of a link. So all those are correct. Let's choose the button here. It reads out as to do 42, so I'll do that again here. To do 42. So that's working. Now the badge. All right, you can see that it skipped over the icon and it focused on the text, which is correct. Now let's see. Okay, so here's an error. Totally skips that next one. So if we were relying on, I'm just going to turn this off for a second. If we were relying on this badge to communicate meaning, it would be lost to a screen reader user because there's nothing there providing any kind of input. So let's just take a look at what's happening under the hood here. All right, you can see in this badge, this icon, it has this attribute aria hidden equals true. So then that one is not going to be read. In the instance, uh, this one, let's see here. We can also see that the same is true. So aria hidden equals true. And so because of that, this icon is going to be skipped over. What we would want to have is aria label and then describe what the meaning of that badge would be in clear text. So if it's a success message, if it's whatever you would typically put for that label, that visible text, you would want to have that in there. So that's a pretty quick demo of this. I would say that what my actions are as a result of this would be is to make sure that documentation ensures that you should test this in the context. Make sure that meaning isn't inferred by the color alone. And I'm also going to make sure that we have it documented that what happens with a badge within a button. Make sure that there's no actionable badges within a button, and then make sure that when we do use an icon, that it's being coded correctly, and that if we allow instances to be icon only, that we make sure to trigger the ARIA label and make that a requirement for this piece. So for now, I'm not going to say whether this passes or not based on some of the further exploration, but I hope this is a quick, helpful demo of how I would do an accessibility audit. If this component were a little more extensive, I would fire up VirtualBox and give it a run through in NVDA and some other things. But I know that I picked this one to start with because it's using some very basic code under the hood. Uh, and we'll do some further testing once we've gone through the other conditions. So that's it for now. Thank you.